Hi there, so today we're going to be talking about drying herbs. As you can see, the garden is in full bloom, so in order to use these herbs throughout the year we're going to dry some today, and it's a really easy thing to do, and it's a great way of making sure you've got herbs to use to make delicious teas and to put into your herbal remedies the whole year through. Now I'm standing beside Ella Campaign here, my good friend Ella Campaign, and one of the reasons why I'm standing beside him is because this plant has got the largest leaves in the garden today. So up here they're quite small, but as we go further down you'll see they're pretty big. Now it's important to know which parts of the herb to use when you're drying them. So for example, for Ella Campaign, even though we've got these wonderful leaves and flowers, we actually use the root or the rhizome when we're making our herbal remedies. So it's really important to know which parts of the herb to use as well as how to dry them. But today we're going to be looking specifically at the different types of plants that you can dry. So for example, we'll be looking at flowers, we'll be looking at leaves, and the best ways of drying that. So let's get started. Hi there, so one of the herbs that we're going to look at today is mint, and mint is really easy to grow in your garden. It's one that I like to grow in pots like this over here because it's quite invasive, so once it gets settled in your garden it does tend to take over the whole garden. It also likes a really rich soil and a really wet soil, so that can be quite difficult to manage in your garden, but if you put it in a pot it's just fine. Now the great thing about mint is that it's really vigorous, and if you cut it back at the beginning of the season it will often come back and give you a second harvest, which is brilliant. And the best time to cut it is just before it comes into flower. So mint is what we call a perennial, which means it comes back year after year after year, so you can be quite vigorous when you cut it. Now when I dry herbs I like to use a dehydrator tray like this, and the reason I like to use it is because you get a lot of airflow through it, and it's very easy to set the plants out on there without them touching, because it's really important that they're not touching each other when they're drying, because you want to maximize airflow and you want to minimize creating any sort of environment that's going to encourage any mold or anything like that. So the way to do it with plants like mint is you take your trusty pair of scissors, and all you're going to do is you cut from the bottom leaves on the stems. So these are our first leaves here. We're just going to cut, and then we're just going to lay it out just like that. It's really easy. Now when we're cutting we do it in a sustainable way, so we're not going to cut all the stems off, and we do it with respect to the plant as well. So I like to just take a moment and just check in with the plant before we do that. It's a bit of an undercover hippie thing, I know, but this is the way to dry these sorts of plants. So we're just finding the stem, finding the bottom leaves, and then just snipping the stem just like that, and then layering it down on the tray. And then we'll do this so we cover the entire tray, and we'll leave this to dry for about a week to 2 weeks. The way you know that it's dried is that the herb is going to be really dry and crinkly to touch. Now the thing to remember is you've got to keep checking quality on these, so you've got to keep smelling the herb, tasting the herb, to make sure you can still taste that mint. So that's peppermint. So here we've got a wonderful rosemary plant which we're going to cut as well. Now the thing with the rosemary is you want to cut the nice fresh green stems, so you don't want to go for the big deep growth under here. One of the things you can also do when you're drying herbs like this is you dry them on the stem, and you can tie them at the top and hang them upside down, and that's also a great way to dry your herbs if you don't have a dehydrator or a drying rack. So the way that we trim these is we go for this nice soft fleshy part up the top here, again finding the bottom two leaves, snipping as we go, and then we can pop that on the dehydrator tray. Now one of the tips is when this herb is dry and you want to take the leaves off the stem, a really easy way to do that is just to take hold of the top and just run the stem and the leaves in the opposite direction, and you'll see that they come away really easily. So that's rosemary. Of course, if you're drying herbs that have a larger leaf like this wonderful marshmallow here, what you want to do is you want to just cut the leaves around the stem and dry those separately because they're large enough to stand on their own. Now when you're doing this, obviously you don't want to strip one of the stems bare, because you want to leave enough leaves for the plant to do what it needs to do. So what you're doing is you're trimming the leaves off around the plant. Now my herbal teacher always used to say to me, when you're picking your herbs, particularly when you're drying them or making a tincture, be mindful that you're picking your medicine. So you want to be choosing leaves that are full of vibrancy and look really alive, They're free from any sort of bug infestation or any sort of pests or anything like that. So you're just choosing the leaves which look really, really happy and healthy. And with Marshmallow, you're just cutting from the stem as you go. So we're just going to cut a couple off now. So here we have our Marshmallow leaf. So I like the look at this one here. These feel so amazing. They're so soft because Marshmallow's got a lot of demulcent properties to it, and it just feels wonderful. So we're cutting as we go. And these are our leaves here, and what we're going to do is we're going to lie them out flat on the tray. So this was our tray previously. We're just going to lie them out flat. And again, the herbs aren't touching, and we're just starting to get a really nice combination of herbs for drying now. Of course, you can use one herb per tray, but I'm just putting them all on the one tray so that you can see how we're getting on with drying our herbs. Next one, flowers. Okay, so now we're going to be looking at how to dry flowers. Now there's two ways you can dry flowers. If you've got a really large flower, you can take the petals off the flower and just lay them on the tray, similar to what we did with the rosemary leaves. Or if you've got a smaller flower like the calendula or like the chamomile, what you can do is you can cut the head off and then use it as a receptacle for those petals. So turn it upside down and it will dry on its own. So the way that we do that is using this beautiful little calendula here. We cut just below the calyx, which is the holds the petals in place, if you can see that there, and then we're going to place it upside down on the tray. So let's just do a couple of those. Got a lovely one down here, just slightly outshot, I know, but what a beautiful flower. And then we just pop them upside down on the tray. So now what we've got is we've got our variety of herbs that we're going to be drying over the next sort of week to 3 weeks, depending on the humidity and how dry it is inside. And then when we've done that, we will take the mint off the stem and the rosemary off the stem and the petals away from the calyx, and then we'll store them in an airtight container away from the light. So that's how easy it is to dry your own herbs. Thanks for listening.